In this final video on the endocrine system, we are going to explain how hormones exert effects on target tissues and the factors influencing hormone target cell interactions. We're going to discuss the regulation of hormone release and the interactions among multiple hormones on a single target cell. And then finally, we're just going to spend a little bit of time and talk about some of the other areas throughout the body where we have hormonal roles of non-endocrine organs. Okay, so we'll talk about the heart, the kidneys, the skin, adipose tissue, bone, and the thymus. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about how hormones work and how they respond to stimuli. Remember, hormones seek to alter the behavior of the cell, and so they can do this a couple of different ways. They can either promote cellular production of some particular enzyme, or they can activate a gene producing a particular protein in the cell. And it really just depends on the type of hormone we're talking about. So if it's a water-soluble hormone, remember they cannot enter the cell, the receptors on the plasma membrane. So typically they're going to be responsible for increasing the cell production of some specific enzyme. Whereas our steroid-based hormones, they have the ability to enter into the cell and go into the nucleus. They're typically going to be responsible for activating a gene in order to produce a specific protein in the cell. And so while hormones can obviously promote a particular behavior of the cell, it can also decrease the behavior of a cell by either limiting the enzymatic activity or the gene transcription and translation activity. And so whether it promotes or inhibits activity will depend on the needs of the tissue. Most hormones are going to be controlled by negative feedback systems. The levels of hormones in the blood will vary over a narrow range. There are 3 ways that can influence the release of a hormone. The hypothalamus within the diencephalon in the brain, it can release hormones that target the pituitary gland, for example, and causes that gland to release hormones. Okay. Receptors on the endocrine glands could promote the release of hormones. And then finally, the nervous system can influence the release of hormones as well. So looking at the stimuli that influences the activities of endocrine glands release hormones in response to 3 stimuli. We have humoral stimuli, which is just events that happen in the blood, so changes in the blood. So for example, if the blood glucose levels were to go up and down, that's going to stimulate the endocrine organs to release a particular hormone. Or if the sodium levels or the calcium levels are out of the normal range, it's going to stimulate certain glands to release certain hormones to help try to get the body back within normal limits. Neural stimuli describes the direct stimulation by nerve fibers to the endocrine glands. And then hormonal stimuli describes the ability of one hormone capability to be able to stimulate another hormone or the release of another hormone. All right, so let's look at humoral stimuli. Okay. Hormone release is caused by altered levels of certain critical ions or nutrients. Okay, so if blood calcium levels are too low, the parathyroid gland can secrete parathyroid hormone to increase blood calcium levels. Now, if blood calcium levels are too high, the thyroid gland can secrete calcitonin to lower blood calcium levels. And so it really just depends on the needs of the body and trying to keep the blood chemistry within normal parameters, within homeostasis. Okay. And then we have the neural stimulus, where the hormone release is caused by neural input. You see on your example on the screen, we have nerve fibers extended from the spinal cord that are in direct connection with the medulla of the adrenal gland. And so innervation by these nerve fibers can cause the hormones within the medulla of the adrenal gland to be released. The adrenal medulla is going to secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are the catecholamines or hormones responsible for our fight or flight response. Okay, and then finally, hormone release caused by another hormone. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit a couple of slides ago with the hypothalamus. It releases some hormones that will target the pituitary gland and cause that gland to produce more hormones. Okay, And so the stimulus is the hormones from the hypothalamus. The response, the anterior pituitary, is going to secrete hormones that stimulate other endocrine glands to secrete hormones. Okay. Here I want to introduce the term tropic hormone. A tropic hormone is a hormone that causes another hormone to be released by the endocrine gland. And so the main difference between tropic and non-tropic hormones is that tropic hormones regulate the activity of other endocrine glands, while non-tropic hormones act directly on target cells. Okay, so I'll give you two examples, right? And I'll give you both from the anterior pituitary gland. There's one hormone called growth hormone. Okay, that is released by the anterior pituitary gland. It targets all of our cells and it helps with our development and growth. All right, because it does not act on another endocrine gland and cause that gland to release hormones per se, we consider it to be a non-tropic hormone. Okay. Let's talk about the same gland, the anterior pituitary gland. It releases another hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, thyroid stimulating hormone will go into the bloodstream, travel to the thyroid, and cause the thyroid to produce thyroid hormone. The thyroid is an endocrine gland, and it produces endocrine hormones. And so, thyroid stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary gland is considered a tropic hormone because it causes the release of thyroid hormone from the thyroid gland. Okay. All right, so the nervous system can influence or adjust the intensity of a hormone based on the body's immediate needs. So in urgent situations, the nervous system can override normal hormonal feedback loops to prioritize survival. During stress, the nervous system signals the adrenal medulla to release epinephrine, increasing the heart rate and energy available, okay, even if the blood glucose sugar levels are normal. And so the nervous system provides a rapid situation-based control, allowing the body to quickly adapt, even if it means kind of overriding the normal functions of those cells, okay? I'll give you another situation. When cortisol levels are high, which typically happen when we are stressed, it can cause the brain to override feedback inhibition and trigger more cortisol release from the adrenal cortex, okay, to allow our blood glucose levels to increase. Let me finish the sentence. And so that prepares the body for fight or flight because we're under extreme stress. The brain doesn't know what's going on, and if we need the extra sugar, so it's going to cause the release of more hormones that are going to influence and promote the release of more blood glucose in the case that we really do need the extra sugar to carry out whatever activities we need to carry, whether we're running away from somebody or whatever the case may be. And so it has this ability to kind of situation by situation modify the hormone levels in situations that need it. All right, so the concentration of a circulating hormone is going to depend on how quickly the hormone is secreted and how fast the hormone is broken down, okay? So it depends on the rate of release and the speed at which it is broken down, inactivated, and removed from the body. A hormone will accumulate if it is released faster than it is cleared, and it's going to decline if it is cleared faster than it is produced. Hormones can be removed from the blood by enzymes. The kidneys does a great job of filtering and removing hormones in our urine, and then the liver serves as a filter and can remove hormones as well. The half-life is the time required for the level of the hormone in the blood level to decrease by half, okay? And so the half-life for hormones are going to vary depending on the hormone, and so it can last anywhere from a fraction of a minute to a week. Hormones with short half-lives like epinephrine act quickly and they're removed quickly. Hormones with long half-lives like the thyroid hormone remain in circulation longer and they have more prolonged effects, okay? So let's do an example where we try to calculate the half-life of a particular hormone at their specified period of time. And we're going to use melatonin. This melatonin has an immediate release half-time of about 30 minutes. It's going to vary the research where it's been tested. It's been between 20 to 50 minutes, but we're going to go with 30 for the purposes of this example. All right. And so let's say you have 200 units of melatonin in your blood. What concentration of melatonin will be in your blood after 90 minutes have passed? All right. So after 30 minutes, we know that we will have half the amount of melatonin in our blood. Okay, so half of 200 is 100. Okay, if we allow time to continue, after about 60 minutes, we're going to expect a half-life of about half of what we had at 30 minutes. Half of 100 would be 50 units. Okay, now we're going to allow another 30 minutes to expire. Okay, bringing us to 90 minutes. And so at 90 minutes, we're going to have half of what we had at 60 minutes. Which was 50 units. So half of 50 units is 25 units. So after 25 units, or after 90 minutes, we would have 25 units of melatonin in our blood for immediate release melatonin. All right, so some hormones are going to act quickly. As mentioned before, epinephrine is one of those quick acting, fast releasing, and then fast or quickly cleared hormones. It can increase the heart rate within seconds, okay? Steroid hormones like cortisol or estrogen are going to take hours to days to cause effect because they alter gene expression. They actually have to enter into the cell and then go through many different processes before we can actually create a protein that can be expressed. Okay. Some hormones are going to remain inactive until they enter the target cells, especially those that are lipid soluble. Because again, they have to enter into the cell and bind to receptors within the cell before they can actually even be activated. Okay, so that's going to vary from seconds to hours depending on the hormone and the target. Now, water-soluble hormones like our amino acid derivatives and peptide-based hormones, they act quickly because they can just interact with the plasma membrane and then do their thing. They're cleared quickly as well. Okay. Lipid-soluble hormones like steroids and thyroid hormone, they're going to act slowly again because they have the ability to affect transcription of the gene, but also they're going to have a longer lasting effect within our cells. Okay. So duration can be anywhere from seconds to hours, and it's again going to depend on the composition and target of the hormone. All right, so the target cell must have receptors that are specific to the hormone. If the hormone cannot bind to the receptor, then the hormone cannot be activated, or it cannot activate the enzymes or proteins that it is designed to activate. So target activation is going to depend on the blood levels of the hormone, the concentration. The higher the amount of hormone within the blood, the easier we are going to have activation of that hormone. The relative number of receptors on or inside the cell. If we have only a few receptors on the plasma membrane, and I'm talking specifically about water-soluble hormones, but let's just use that as an example. If we only have a few receptors, but we have lots and lots and lots of hormone, we're not going to have a lot of activation because we don't have enough receptors that can accommodate the concentration of hormone that we have in the blood. So if we have a decent amount of receptors available to interact with the hormones, then we're going to have some good target activation. And then the strength or affinity of binding between the receptor and the hormone. If we have high affinity, it means that the hormone can bind very tightly and is more likely to stay bound. We don't have competition with other hormones or other molecules that are in the area. And so with strong affinity, even at low concentrations of hormone, we can have a nice little connection between the receptor and the hormone. If we have low affinity, then we're going to have weaker binding, okay, which is going to require higher concentrations for the effect. And so affinity can influence the sensitivity of the target cell, whereas high affinity receptors are going to trigger a response with less hormone. All right, so hormones can influence the number of receptors for that hormone. We have upregulation in which the target cell will form more receptors in response to low hormone levels. This makes the cell more sensitive to the hormone. And so in cases where we have low insulin, cells may upregulate receptors on the plasma membrane to try and capture more insulin in the area, since the insulin concentration is lower, okay? And then on the flip side, we have downregulation, where the target cells will lose receptors in response to very high hormone levels, okay? And so this desensitizes the target cells to prevent them from overreacting or being overstimulated by the presence of high hormone concentration, okay? One place that we see this is in type 2 diabetes. In type 2 diabetes, the body often produces very high levels of insulin over time to compensate for the rise in glucose levels. However, by having this consistently high blood glucose level and this consistently high insulin concentration, this can lead to the downregulation of those receptors on those cells, meaning that the cells remove the receptors on the surface so that they don't overreact. They kind of get desensitized over time. And so as a result, the cells become less responsive to insulin, which insulin is very important for reducing blood glucose levels. And so if you have someone who does have chronically high blood glucose levels, you don't want a situation where the receptors for insulin that's going to help them kind of lower those levels decreases. But this is what happens. And so it leads to a condition known as insulin resistance, which is going to worsen blood sugar control. And so this just creates a vicious cycle where more insulin is needed, but the body responds less effectively, okay? So here are some key terms describing how hormones may affect the activities of another hormone. Hormones that have opposite effects, where we have one hormone decreases or reverses the action of another. This is called antagonism. And we see this with insulin and glucagon. Insulin is going to lower blood glucose levels. Glucagon is going to increase blood glucose levels, okay? We have permissiveness, where we have one hormone that can't exert its full effect unless another hormone is available to work. And so the permissive hormone essentially enables the action of the second hormone. So we see this with the thyroid hormone and epinephrine. Thyroid hormone can increase the number of receptors for epinephrine so that it has a stronger effect on our target tissues, especially in places like the heart. We have synergism, where we have two or more hormones acting together to produce a combined effect that's greater than the sum of their separate effects. We see this with glucagon and epinephrine. They both can stimulate the release of glucose from the liver, providing a rapid increase in blood sugar during stress. All right, so let's talk about a few of those organs that are not endocrine organs but also secrete hormones, okay? The stomach and small intestine is going to secrete hormones that affect and control digestion. And we'll talk about those hormones when we get to the digestive unit. So I won't throw a whole bunch of terms at you here. Just know that we have hormones in this area that can affect and control our digestion. The heart also has hormones that can, I didn't mean for the heart to disappear, but the heart also has hormones that can respond to changes in stretch within the chambers of the heart. And so typically what happens when there's like high blood pressure, there's a hormone that can be released that can help kind of reverse that, okay, and get us back to normal. And then we have the kidneys that can release hormones that are going to play a huge role with calcium and vitamin D reabsorption. And then also there's a hormone called erythropoietin that is going to be responsible for stimulating the production of red blood cells. So here are your practice questions for this video. As always, take a moment, reflect on it, see what you have in your notes if you have the information to support the answers that I'm requesting here. And if you have questions about any of these, as always, feel free to reach out to me and let's have a conversation about it.